Hi, my name is Elissa Hanley, and this is my presentation on Lakota resistance throughout the centuries. The Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, and other nations entered into the first Fort Laramie Treaty with the United States in 1851. The land they were entitled to makes up 6 to 7% of the United States today and includes South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and a small portion of Colorado. However, only about a decade after the treaty was established, gold was discovered near this land. To get this gold, American settlers created the Bozeman Trail, which cut directly through the home of the Lakota. To fight against this disturbance, the Lakota, led by Red Cloud, entered an alliance with the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. After countless attacks from these nations, the U.S. surrendered and drafted a second Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. This new version of the treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation, of which Lakota were allowed permanent use, and also prohibited non-natives from trespassing in Lakota territory. Once again, the United States did not uphold its end of the treaty. A Catholic priest illegally trespassed into the Black Hills and reported to the South Dakota newspaper that he had discovered gold on Lakota land. This led to several military expeditions, and the United States sent another treaty commission to the Lakota in an attempt to purchase the entirety of the Black Hills. When the Lakotas refused to sell, Washington responded by transferring its relations with them from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to the Department of War. The Lakota people were assigned certain locations within the Great Sioux Reservation, and anyone who ventured past their assigned area would be treated as a hostile. The Lakota continued to fight against the U.S. Army and defeated them several times. However, the Army began to starve and slaughter any Lakota they could find. In 1877, the Lakota surrendered, and Congress expropriated the entirety of the Black Hills. Due to allotment, more than 2/3 of the most valuable land went to non-native ranchers and farmers. The Lakota, however, never stopped resisting. Just 3 decades later, Congress passed a law that allowed the Lakota to sue the government. They passed this law with the intention of purchasing the rest of the land from the Lakota. In 1923, the Lakota opened a suit with the U.S. Court of Claims. Instead of fighting for monetary compensation, however, the Lakota were fighting for the return of their stolen land. The court did not expect this, and they stalled the case for 19 years. When it became clear that the Lakota would not accept monetary compensation, the court dismissed the case entirely. They claimed the situation was a moral issue rather than a constitutional question over which it held jurisdiction. The Lakota reopened their case with the Claims Commission in 1950, but it was dismissed again 4 years later. The commission entered a preliminary opinion in 1974, stating that Congress was exercising its power of eminent domain in 1877, and therefore it was justified in taking the Black Hills from the Lakota. Instead of returning the land, they offered the Lakota $17.5 million. The Lakota tried to appeal this to the Supreme Court, but they refused to consider their case. In 1980, the Lakota fought for the recovery of their land as well as $11 billion in damages, but the court would only offer them $122.5 million, stating this option as the exclusive available remedy. Another act of resistance is the occupation of Wounded Knee, the site of the infamous 1890 massacre located on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Along with the American Indian Movement, approximately 200 Sioux Native Americans occupied Wounded Knee as a form of protest against the government's failure to fulfill its treaty obligations. They demanded an investigation into the Bureau of Indian Affairs and all Sioux reservations, and for the government to hold hearings on the treaties broken by the United States. They occupied Wounded Knee for 2 months, 1 week, and 4 days. Multiple shootouts between the occupiers and law enforcement occurred. Water, electricity, and other supplies were cut off, and there were several deaths and injuries. On May 8th, officials promised to investigate their concerns, and the protesters surrendered. Wounded Knee was returned to the United States government control. While Congress did nothing to honor the broken treaties, some tribes did win major settlements in cases involving tribal land claims. The Lakota's fight for their land continues today. Between 2014 and 2017, the Dakota Access Pipeline was built. It cost $3.7 billion and runs 1,200 miles through native treaty lands and ancient burial grounds. It also runs underneath the Standing Rock Reservation's only natural water source. The Lakota and other Sioux tribes have been protesting the construction of this pipeline since it was first proposed. Although federal law requires the Corps of Engineers to consult with the tribe about its sovereign interests, permits for the project were approved and construction began without any consultation. The Dakota Access Pipeline was exempt from the environmental reviews required by the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. Standing Rock youth runners traveled thousands of miles to spread the word, while elders and supporters gathered around construction sites in protest. They were met with violence and incarceration, and the pipeline was still constructed, even after millions joined the No Dabble movement. Janet Elkir, chairwoman of the Standing Rock tribe, states that the fight is not over. As long as the pipeline is operating, their water and their livelihoods are threatened. Today, the Sioux tribes are fighting for the right to a just and trustworthy environmental impact statement on the pipeline.